the walls between us. The first time, Officer Maya Reyes pressed her hand against the cold steel door of Block C. She told herself it was just another shift. She had told herself that every morning for 3 years, laced her boots, pinned her badge, and reminded herself that the people behind those doors were cases, not people. It was the only way to survive the job. It was the only lie that ever worked. But on a gray Tuesday in November, the lie finally broke. And it broke because of a woman named Dani Castillo, who was sitting alone in the prison yard with a paperback copy of The Alchemist pressed against her knees. Reading in the rain like the weather was something that happened to other people. Maya had been assigned to the women's correctional facility in Harrow County, straight out of the academy. She was 26, sharp-eyed, and determined to be nothing like the officers she had seen on television. Indifferent, cruel, hollowed out by routine, she had grown up watching her mother clean other people's houses, watching her father work double shifts at a warehouse that never once learned his name, and she had carried that quiet fury into every decision she ever made. She became a police officer because she believed in justice, but 3 years inside, those walls had slowly taught her the difference between justice and the system that claimed to deliver it. The women in Harrow County were not monsters. They were mothers with impossible choices, daughters from zip codes the world had already written off, women who had made one catastrophic mistake, or women who had simply been too poor to afford a lawyer who cared. Maya had learned to look past that to do her job, to keep her emotions in a locked drawer somewhere behind her ribs. And then she met Dani. Dani Castillo was 29 and serving a 4-year sentence for aggravated assault. She had defended herself against a man who had been hurting her for 2 years, and the court had called it excessive force. She had arrived at Harrow County with a bruise still fading along her jaw and a silence about her that felt less like defeat and more like a decision. She did not cry during intake. She did not fight with other inmates. She kept to herself with a kind of dignity that seemed almost defiant in a place designed to strip dignity away. She drew in a notebook she kept hidden under her mattress. She read every book the prison library had, sometimes twice, and she had these eyes, dark, patient, and unbearably awake, that saw everything, missed nothing, and seemed to hold a kind of grief that had long since finished grieving and turned itself into something else, something quieter and more permanent. Maya noticed her the way you notice a fire in a window when you're walking home in the cold. Not loudly, not all at once, just a warmth you catch at the corner of your eye and then can't stop moving toward. It started with small things. Maya began taking the longer route through Block C during her rounds. She started noticing which book Dani was reading and found herself curious about what she thought of it. She noticed that Dani never asked for anything, never complained, never caused trouble, and yet somehow the other inmates gravitated toward her, came to her when they were frightened, sat near her at meals the way people sit near a window when the light is good. There was something in Dani that the place had not yet managed to touch. And Maya, who had felt the place touching her for 3 years, was undone by it. The first real conversation happened during a lockdown. A fight had broken out in the East Wing, and Maya had been posted outside Block C while the situation was resolved. Dani was the only inmate still in the corridor. She had been returning books to the library cart, and rather than returning her to her cell immediately, Maya had simply stood beside her in the fluorescent hum of the hallway and asked, almost without meaning to, whether she had liked the book. Dani had looked at her with those patient, dangerous eyes and said that there was a line in it she had been thinking about for days, something about how the universe conspires to help people who are following their dreams. And then she had said quietly and without bitterness that she used to believe that she had stopped, that she was trying to decide whether to start again. Maya had not slept well after that. She lay in her apartment with the city sounds coming through the window and thought about a woman in a 6x8 cell trying to decide whether to believe in a universe that had not been kind to her. And something in Maya's chest had shifted like furniture moving in another room. She told herself it was compassion. She told herself it was professional concern. She told herself a number of things, and none of them were entirely false, and none of them were entirely true. What followed was something that neither of them had planned, and both of them had felt coming the way you feel a change in weather. In the pressure, In the quality of the light? In the way the air feels different against your skin? It was built in stolen moments. A conversation about books that stretched 5 minutes past its natural end. A look held a half-second too long across the yard. A morning when Maya had brought an extra apple with her lunch and left it on the library cart without saying a word, and Dani had looked at her from across the room with an expression that asked a question and received an answer, all without a single sound. It was the most honest conversation Maya had ever had. But honesty inside a prison is its own kind of contraband. Maya knew the rules. She had sworn an oath. She understood, with a clarity that felt like swallowing glass, that what was growing between them was not permitted. Not by the institution. Not by the badge on her chest. Not by the 20 feet of professional distance she was required to maintain at all times. She avoided Dani for 2 weeks. She requested reassignment to the East Wing. She sat in her car before shifts and told herself that she was protecting them both, that anything else was a fantasy, that the world did not bend itself into shapes that were this inconvenient and this beautiful at the same time. And then Dani was involved in an incident, not a fight, not a violation, but a medical emergency with another inmate, that Dani had managed with a calm and competence that had likely saved the woman's life. And Maya had been the first officer to arrive, and she had found Dani kneeling on the floor with another woman's head in her lap, pressing a strip of torn fabric against a wound, speaking softly, steadily, telling the woman she was going to be all right, that she was right there, that she was not alone. Maya had stood in the doorway and watched a woman in a prison uniform hold another human being, together with nothing but her hands and her voice, and she had known, with the same certainty with which, that you are falling before you hit the ground, that she was in love with Dani Castillo. It did not feel triumphant. It felt like standing at the edge of something vast and looking down. It felt like the most frightening and most true thing she had ever known. She applied for a transfer the next morning. She sat across from her supervisor and gave professional reasons, career development, a desire to work in community policing, a need for change. She did not say, there is a woman behind your walls and she is made of something I have never encountered before, and I cannot be near her and be the person my badge requires me to be. She did not say that. She signed the paperwork and she told herself it was the right thing, the only thing, the honorable thing. And it was all of those things. And it was also the hardest thing she had ever done. Dani was released 14 months later. Her sentence had been reduced for good behavior and an appeal that finally found a judge willing to look at the circumstances of her case with clear eyes. Maya had already been working in community outreach for nearly a year by then, running a program that connected recently released women with housing and employment resources. She had built it from almost nothing, driven by something she could not entirely name, a need to do something real, something that closed the gap between the justice she had believed in and the one she had seen. She was at her desk on a Wednesday afternoon, in January, when the door to her office opened, and Dani Castillo walked in carrying a folder of intake paperwork and those same dark, patient, awake eyes. They stood very still for a moment, the way two people stand when the world has made an unlikely and enormous decision on their behalf. And then Dani smiled, slow and careful and lit from somewhere deep, and said that she had heard there was a program, that she needed help finding work, that she had been told to ask for Maya Reyes. Maya later found out that a mutual acquaintance and one of the other women from Harrow County who had gone through the program had told Dani where she worked. She never found out whether it was coincidence or design, and she decided in the end that it did not matter. What mattered was the coffee they had after the intake paperwork was filed, sitting at a small table near the window with the January light coming in cold and gold through the glass. What mattered was the conversation that lasted 3 hours and covered books and families and fear and hope and every country of the interior that neither of them had let anyone visit before. What mattered was that somewhere in that 3-hour conversation, the distance between who they had been to each other and who they might be collapsed entirely, quietly, and with the inevitability of something that had been waiting a very long time. Their relationship grew the way real things grow, slowly, imperfectly, with setbacks and silences, and moments where the weight of everything that had come before pressed down on them hard enough to make the ground uncertain. There were people who did not understand, people who raised their eyebrows or asked uncomfortable questions or suggested that the history between them was too complicated for what they were building. And maybe it was complicated. Maybe the history of walls and uniforms and locked doors would always live somewhere in the texture of what they were. But complicated is not the same as broken, and the past is not always a wound. Sometimes it is the specific path that leads to the only place you were ever supposed to arrive. Maya's mother, who had spent 30 years cleaning other people's houses and never once stopped believing that love was the most revolutionary act available to ordinary people, cried when she met Dani, not from sadness, from recognition, from the look on her daughter's face, which was the look of a person who had finally stopped lying to herself and was standing, clear-eyed and open-handed, in the middle of her own life. If this story reached something inside you, if it reminded you that love does not ask for permission, that dignity cannot be incarcerated, and that the most powerful thing two people can do is see each other fully and choose to stay, then let this video know that it mattered. Like it, share it with someone who needs to hear that walls come down, that good things find people who deserve them, that the universe sometimes does conspire after all. Your support is not a small thing. It tells the next person sitting alone at 3 in the morning that this story exists, that someone made it for them, that they are not invisible. Before we end, and tell us in the comments, have you ever loved someone that the world said you shouldn't? Have you ever had to walk away from something real because the rules demanded it, and then found your way back? We want to hear your story, every single one of them, because every wall eventually ends. And on the other side, sometimes, there is Dani, there is Maya, there is a small table near a window, and January light, and a conversation that lasts 3 hours and changes everything. There is the quiet, radical miracle of being seen, not despite where you came from, not in spite of what the world made of you, but completely, exactly, and without reservation as you are.